Welcome to the Fit Strong Women Over 50 podcast, episode number 93. Hi, I'm Chris. Thank you for joining us today.
And I'm Jill. Chris and I are the founders of the Becoming Elli community.
The Becoming Elli community is for women over 50 who are interested in being fit, strong, and healthy.
We named our group Becoming Elli because Elli was the Norse goddess of aging who beat Thor in a wrestling match. We thought, hey, we want to be like Elli.
You can find out more about the Becoming Elli community and this podcast at our website, becomingelli.com. Elli is spelled E-L-L-I.
Be sure to sign up for our newsletter while you're there. That way you'll know about new episodes and anything else that's new in our world.
We're talking with Dr. Angie Ridgel today about brain health and her work with Parkinson's.
Yes, Angie gave us lots of information. Let's go to the podcast.
We are happy to welcome Dr. Angie Ridgel back to our podcast. She spoke to us along with her coaching partner, Pam Semenek, a couple years ago. Since then, she's been working on some really interesting projects, so we were eager to talk to her again.
Dr. Angie Ridgel is a professor in exercise physiology and the associate director of the Brain Health Research Institute at Kent State University.
She received her undergraduate degree in biology from the College of William and Mary, a master's degree in biology at Villanova University, and her PhD in Biomedical Sciences from Marshall University. Dr. Ridgel completed her post-doctoral training at Case Western Reserve University and the Cleveland Clinic.
Her research focuses on how exercise and movement therapy improves brain health and function in older adults and those with neurological disorders.
She is also a competitive multi-sport athlete, a USA cycling certified coach, a fellow of the American College of Sports Medicine, and the owner of Stellari Performance Training, an endurance coaching business. Thank you so much for talking with us today, Angie. We're really excited to talk to you.
Oh, I'm glad to be back.
Yes, it's great to have you here. As Chris mentioned, we recently talked with Pam, your partner in Stellari Training, and we talked about the importance of exercise for master women athletes. So we thought we would talk with you more about dealing with progressive disease and brain health as we age. I guess my first question is there a significant difference in the importance of exercise for healthy adults and those dealing with diseases such as Parkinson's or Alzheimer's?
Well, of course, exercise is helpful for all of us, right? At multiple levels, right? What we study specifically is we all know that exercise can help improve cardiovascular fitness and help improve muscle strength. But what we really want to do is use exercise to try to actually promote healthy nervous systems and potentially to help repair nervous systems after damage. So in the work with the neurological disorders, what we're trying to do is we're trying to improve the function of a damaged nervous system, whereas in healthy people, we just want to try to keep it as healthy as we can.
Yes, good point.
Well, it seems like there are two issues talking about the disease. The first is figuring out ways to avoid getting them, and the second is improving health once you get them. In your research, is there a specific type of exercise that you found really protects against Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease?
So a lot of that work is ongoing, but there is a decent amount of evidence to support that any kind of aerobic exercise would be helpful for reducing the risk of developing Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. But what we want to focus on is looking a little more carefully at what does that mean, right? As you know, aerobic exercise is a broad range.
Right.
We could do low intensity exercise where we're just breaking a sweat, or we could go as hard as we can go for a short period of time. So a lot of the research has found actually that higher intensity interval training is actually very helpful, which is a little counterintuitive to what we might expect. You wouldn't necessarily want an older person or a person with a neurological disorder to do the higher intensity. But I can talk about some of the projects that we've been working on that have really looked at that specifically to try to focus on intensity. And we think that that is really going to help more than just a lower intensity exercise. So that's kind of the focus of a lot of the research going on in the lab and also in other labs as well.
Awesome.
That's interesting. You're right. That is not where people would go, I suspect. That's probably, seems counterintuitive.
Right.
After a diagnosis, then you're saying the high intensity training exercise is what could help improve
Correct.
your function.
Right. I can tell you about a couple projects that we've done and we're doing now, and then a brand new project that we just started to be part of. The new project is a trial called the SPARKS-3 trial. It's actually a multi-site trial that is started out of Northwestern University, Daniel Korko's lab. Actually, it's a multi-site trial where there are 28 sites across the U.S. and Canada where we are recruiting people. This is Parkinson's specific, but we're recruiting people to be randomized to either a high heart rate intervention, treadmill-based intervention, or a moderate-based treadmill intervention. And so with that one, the heart rate goals for the intervention group is actually 80 to 90% of their heart rate max.
Oh, wow.
Right. So we're working them up to that. And then the other group is a lower intensity. And what they're hypothesizing is that we hope that the higher intensity group will progress slower. So it's a long-term intervention. It's a year-long intervention. And so we're looking at actually progression of disease. And that's one of the first studies that has looked really at progression over time.
Well, that's awesome. I'll be very interested to see how that ends up. And that could really change everything.
It could, yeah. It's a really exciting trial to be part of. We're doing it in collaboration with University Hospital Case Western. There's also a site at Cleveland Clinic, and actually in Ohio, we have 4 sites for this study. It's the only state that has that many sites. So we're excited about the fact that there are 4 sites for this particular trial. One in Columbus, one in Cincinnati, and then Akron, Kent area, and then Cleveland.
So there's a lot of people involved with it. You probably don't have the final number of who is in the study yet, like how many people it is.
So we just started, as you might imagine, took a long time to kind of get up to the point where we were all trained and comfortable with everything. So our site just got approval about 2 months ago to start recruiting. And so we're just doing a couple last minute things, but we'll be ready to start recruiting soon. And then I know that the Cleveland Clinic has started to recruit as well. So we're just rolling with it.
Right.
It's a 4-year study, so we'll be busy with it for a while. But we're really excited about that.
That's wonderful. Well, I know in preparing to talk with you, we looked at some of your things online, and I heard you talking about dopamine. And I wanted to ask, what is dopamine and how does it affect the body and the mind?
Right. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter that we all produce. There are cells in the brainstem, which is the area of our brain that's between the spinal cord and the cortex, the big thing up there in your head. And these particular neurons, they're called substantia nigra neurons. And they're called that because if you actually take a slice through that, the neurons look black in the slice, but they produce dopamine. And dopamine is, it's kind of that feel-good chemical. So when you exercise or when your mood is uplifted, is when dopamine is released. And it's also very important in movement. So all the voluntary movements that we do, dopamine plays an important role in that. And so when you have a disease like Parkinson's, where the dopaminergic neurons die, and we don't know why, most Parkinson's is called idiopathic, which is a big word, but that means of unknown origin. Those neurons die. And once you get to a certain percentage of them not producing dopamine, that's when you start to get the typical Parkinson's symptoms that you see, the tremor and the slowness of movement. If you don't have it, it causes a lot of problems in terms of movement, and also low dopamine increases some mood disorders as well.
Like depression, that type of thing.
Correct. It has a role. I mean, the serotonin also plays a role in depression, but we know that people with Parkinson's disease have almost a double risk of developing depression above and beyond the healthier population. So they're all tied together.
I'm going to divert here for a minute because that's interesting, because when we had someone on the podcast a few episodes ago, we were talking about recovering from stroke. And one of the things that came up was that some high percentage of stroke victims end up having severe depression afterwards. She didn't know why that was, but it sounds like it's sort of...
I was kind of half blaming it on medications, because it seems like so many medications have side effects to them. But
yeah, no, you're just saying that made me think, oh, maybe there is actually a physical reason going on there.
Sure. Well, it depends on where the stroke is, right?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So, I mean, a lot of the strokes, that may be in the areas that produce movement, all of those neurons are interconnected. Mm-hmm. Obviously, with Parkinson's, you get disruption of the dopaminergic neurons, and that influences movement, because there are all these very complicated circuits in the brain that the neurons talk to each other. And so basically you disrupt, one of those highways of neuron pathways, then you get disruptions. So.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. So often people who have Parkinson's disease have more limited movements, obviously, as you just said. So how do you get someone with the disease to move fast or lift heavy or do these high intensity training things?
Right. So the other studies that we've been doing, that leads me right into that. So a lot of the work we've been doing for the past 10 or 12 years has actually focused on cycling-based interventions. Which makes sense. I love cycling, so it seemed like a normal path. So what we did, some of the earlier studies that I did when I was working at Cleveland Clinic, actually we used a tandem bike to train people with Parkinson's. And what we did in that study was that the captain, or the person on the front of the bike, was dictating how fast we were spinning legs. And what we did was, our goal was to focus on trying to spin around 80 to 90 revolutions per minute. And so in that study, we actually found that the people who rode the tandem with the trainer, mostly, which I trained them myself, and I had a friend of mine also do that those people improved their motor function much more than people who just exercised on a bike on their own, where we didn't dictate cadence, but we asked them just to maintain a certain heart rate. So those people pedaled much more slowly, and they didn't show the improvement that the people on the tandem did. That was kind of the start of what we've been doing for the last 10 years. Obviously, riding a tandem bike with a person with Parkinson's is not for the faint of heart. You needed a pretty strong trainer. So what we did was we developed a motorized bike, and we basically modeled. I worked with some computer scientists and engineers at Case Western. We modeled basically the trainer using a motor. So the motor acts as the trainer, and we basically designed the controller to be able to push the legs using the motor and to simulate the trainer. That's the work that we've been doing for the past several years, and the work that's been funded by the Davis Phinney Foundation, which is a foundation that has been started by Davis Phinney, who was actually a professional cyclist many years ago, and he actually rode the Tour de France, and he developed Parkinson's, and so he started this foundation, and they support a lot of exercise-based research for Parkinson's.
You mentioned high cadence in 80 to 90 revolutions per minute. For those that don't bike ride, how do you compare that to, like, I don't know, miles per hour on a bike? Like if you're going at a casual rate, it's like 9 or 10 miles an hour? How do you compare? Like, for those that don't know what high cadence or 80, 90 revolutions per minute means.
Yeah, it's a little hard to dictate speed, right? Because it depends on resistance.
Right, yeah. Sure.
But I'll tell you that most people, if they get on the bike, may generally pedal about 60 revolutions per minute. So that's, if you put on a metronome or think about that, you can kind of get an estimate of it. I mean, for most people, that's pretty fast. But for cyclists that we practice cadence work a lot, it's part of our training. 80 to 90 is kind of the go-to cadence.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I rode on a tandem bike with someone who obviously has a much higher cadence than I do. And it was horrible. I was trying to ride that bike and yelling, "Slow down. I can't go that fast." It wasn't even that
your legs were flying around.
I don't really feel like we were going speed-wise all that fast, but his legs were moving a lot more than mine were. And I finally just took my feet off the pedals and was like, I'm done here. So I could see why you found a way to do it so that you didn't have to ride the bike for everyone.
Right. And, it's challenging for some people at first. But what we do is we get them comfortable with it. And it's amazing how quickly people can learn how to do that.
Are there certain songs that you play, like music, to try to get people to go faster?
You could. Actually, in the original tandem studies, we did allow people to play music. One of the things about having people play music is you're adding another variable, right? So if you're trying to control the experiment, then in the latest experiments we've done, we haven't used music, although music would probably be very helpful. It's just adding another complexity that we have to control.
Yep. Well, I just think of my spinning classes. That's how I can go fast is with the music,
Sure. Yeah, the motorized bike that we've developed, actually we gamified it.
Yeah.
So the goal is we have a little hot air balloon.
Okay.
And there's water, and they have to keep the hot air balloon above the water.
That's good. Yeah.
And so they have to try to keep up to try to do that. So it makes it a little more fun.
Yeah, gamify.
There's a rowing machine I've used, and it has a game like that where you have to, how hard you're rowing dictates whether you're going to run into the big fish or little fish or whatever. I don't know. But it's amazing how those little games on a screen are motivating.
Sure.
Well, I was wondering too, how do you know that the brain has rewired successfully with someone who has diminished strength, balance, and walking abilities? Like, how do you measure things?
So a lot of the work that we do in the lab now is just looking at basic movement and motor function, right? So with Parkinson's, we can assess the symptoms. So we can look at how much has the tremor decreased. We can look at speed of movement. So we'll have them do tests where we can measure the speed of movement. And we did do some work. We did some fMRI work with the original tandem studies, where we actually had the people, we put them in a functional MRI scanner, and we looked at activity of brain areas that were important in producing movement. And we actually showed in those studies that we did get increases in areas of the brain that produced movement. So that suggested that we were actually getting changes in the functional activity of the neurons after that high cadence cycling. So obviously fMRI is a gold standard for looking at brain activity. In the latest studies, we haven't done that. We've mostly been just focusing on movement and function.
If we or someone in our family gets a diagnosis of Parkinson's, what should we do? And how likely is it that a doctor is going to tell us to do high intensity cycling?
We're trying to change that, as you might imagine. Those of us who believe in it, it's pretty unlikely that a doctor would tell you to do that. Although exercise in Parkinson's work has been going on for a while. There are a bunch of different types of modes of exercise that people have examined, including dance therapy, there are a lot of treadmill type therapy type studies. And so now neurologists and other physicians they're aware of that literature because it's pretty significant. And so they're starting to give people prescriptions for exercise. I mean, one of the challenges is too that physicians they don't have a lot of time to do that, or they may not be versed in giving people specific instructions. But there are a lot of neurological physical therapists could be helpful because they are comfortable with people with neurological disorders. And more there are dance classes for Parkinson's people with Parkinson's. There are exercise classes for people. And in Northeast Ohio, we actually have an organization called In Motion, which is in Beechwood, and they actually have a Parkinson's specific fitness facility.
Oh, wow.
That's free. That's free for people with Parkinson's. So I would encourage people, at least in Northeast Ohio, to reach out to them. It's a really great organization, and they have boxing classes, and they have cycling classes, and they have strength classes and Tai Chi, and they do a lot of different types of things.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Wow. So if you're not in Northeast Ohio, perhaps look online for comparable kinds of programs.
What was the name of that again?
In Motion, INMOTION.
I'll make sure we include that in the show notes. So for our listeners, you don't have to worry about if you're driving or exercising, trying to write that down.
I will say more and more that there are support groups that could give people resources. You can go to, I actually, a couple weeks ago, did a talk together with Dr. Kilbane, who's a neurologist at University Hospital, and Dr. Bailey, who's a neuropsychologist. We gave a webinar for the Ohio Parkinson's Foundation, and the title of the webinar was Mood, Motion, and Music. So we were talking about how exercise can improve not only motor function, but also cognitive function in individuals with Parkinson's. So more and more, there are a lot of resources out there for everyone, wherever they live.
That leads directly into my next question, because you mentioned that depression in your TED Talk was another neurological problem that can be improved with exercise. What role does exercise play in helping depression, and does it also help with anxiety?
There is evidence to support both of those. As you know, depression is caused by decreased serotonin, and we know that exercise increases serotonin. So there's a lot of evidence to support that. It helps people to just feel better about themselves. I know it's challenging sometimes for people to start an exercise program, but I know that there's a lot of evidence to support that it does help, and oftentimes, can improve depression and potentially decrease the need for depression medications. Most depression medications, the primary one is serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs. Mm-hmm. What those do is those prevent you from reabsorbing serotonin so that it's available for the neurons longer. And so that's what those drugs do. So if we can increase serotonin with exercise, then you could potentially need less of those medications.
Ah, interesting. Do you have any advice on how we keep our memory working well? Like our brain changes, I know, as we age, but we really want to have a working memory.
Right. So one of the things that's important is, of course, to keep using it. Right?
Yes.
But there's a lot of evidence to support that you need to really challenge yourself. You need to try to find skills and tasks that take cognitive challenge. One of those things is, an example would be like a dual task, which would be you're moving and thinking at the same time, like walking and doing a math problem in your head. That's what's called a dual task. Again, challenging, and you need to make sure you're safe when you're doing that. But those types of, the more challenge you give to the nervous system, the better it rises to that challenge.
Okay. If you can combine cognitive exercise with physical exercise.
Yes. Yeah. A lot of the research actually uses what we call dual task paradigms to test that. They would have you walk and do a math sequence or something that takes concentration and attention along with movement and getting your heart rate up.
Okay.
That's cool. Are there any other lifestyle changes that you recommend people make to remain healthy?
Well, just general diet type of things. So, you want to eat lots of fruits and vegetables, and anti-inflammatory foods are very helpful for the brain. Also for Parkinson's. Actually, a lot of the Parkinson's foundations have very specific guidelines for, what kind of foods you should eat versus not, to try to decrease the inflammation throughout the body that can help keep your neurons healthy. So those would just be my general guidelines.
We referenced Alzheimer's several times here, but I know your research is really with Parkinson's. But so are the two things at all related? And like what you're talking about of how you improve things with Parkinson's, would that also help with Alzheimer's?
So potentially, yes. There is some research that has been done looking at higher intensity exercise in Alzheimer's, but it's a little more challenging depending on where people are in the progression of the disease. As you might imagine, if somebody doesn't understand why you're asking them to do something, then it would be a little more challenging in doing
right.
that.
So you'd be better off to be talking about in early stages of Alzheimer's.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
But again, I mean, just moving in Alzheimer's, getting people to do any type of exercise that could potentially increase blood flow to the brain. And we know that exercise actually increases some neural growth factors that are helpful in repairing the brain and also keeping the neurons healthy. So if any type of exercise you can do could increase the release of those type of nerve growth factors could be helpful as well.
And you just mentioned that again, is that it is possible to improve the health of your brain if you do these things that
it is. And one of the caveats and with research is that, everybody responds differently, right? So with research and those of us who do human subject research know that everybody's different. And so it's a little challenging to kind of make broad recommendations that would be best for everyone. But what we've done in our work is to try to actually use technology to try to predict what people would need. So one of the other studies that we're doing in our lab with the motorized bike is that we're trying to develop basically predictive models that would be able to say, if a person comes into the lab, kind of what are their baseline characteristics, what type of function do they have? And then we would be able to predict what would be optimal for that person.
Oh.
So there is an individualized effect. But a lot of people are using technology and, focusing more on kind of the personalized medicine.
Right.
And, personalized exercise for people that would maximize their particular benefit.
Oh, that's exciting.
There's a lot out there. I mean, we're not the only ones doing this work. There are a lot of people doing really great work across the U.S. and also abroad. So, I mean, one of the pushes that those of us who study sports medicine and exercise medicine is that, exercise really is medicine at multiple levels. And actually the American College of Sports Medicine has a group that's called the Exercises Medicine Group. I'm on one of their committees as Exercises Medicine for Older Adults. So that's what we're focusing on. So all of those people are really kind of focusing on how can we use exercise to improve the quality of life and also minimize the risk of disease in older adults.
Yeah, it's not just Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. It's just the whole aging thing can be pretty difficult. We cannot let you go without asking you about what you've been doing yourself with your cycling and what's new with you fitness-wise.
Right. This past summer was a challenge for everybody to kind of get back into the groove.
Yeah.
I did focus mostly on time trial this year. So there were several of those local time trials. And I actually went back to my roots a bit. So I started out in 2001 as a triathlete. And I did sprint triathlon, and then I went and did Olympic, and I worked myself up to half distance. And then I backed off and focused mostly on cycling, and then I moved to duathlon. And so I actually did 2 sprint triathlons this last summer.
Oh, exciting.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, so they were fun. And my goal was to try to qualify for the national championship in Milwaukee next year. So I did do that.
Excellent.
Next year, I'll be going back to my roots and doing a little bit of triathlon and also focusing on the time trial.
Well, congratulations on making the nationals.
Yes, congratulations. That's awesome. If our listeners wanted to find out more about your research and about you, where would they go? We can put that in the show notes.
Right. So you could just Google me. That's a pretty easy way. If you go to Kent State University and then just search for my name, That would be my bios on there. And then you can get a little more information about the research lab that we have. And then that'll link you to a couple paragraphs about the 2 studies that I just mentioned.
Excellent.
And people could always, I'll give my work email to you. It's aridgel@kent.edu.
All right, great.
And if they want to see any of your coaching services, they would go to
stellaritraining.com.
We'll include that as well. Thank you. Gosh, that's great. We'll put these links in the show notes so that everyone has access to them.
Excellent.
Angie, thank you so much for talking with us today. It's been really interesting.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you all again.
Yeah, I feel like we really learned a lot.
Hope to see you in person sometime.
Yeah, it's been great having you here. Thank you for being our guest.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Angie is sure doing some great work, isn't she?
Yes, it's really interesting how exercise can help with neurological diseases like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and, of course, the mood-altering diseases like anxiety and depression.
Yeah, I guess we need to continue to work out and stay strong.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? I really am encouraged about hearing the high velocity or high impact or
high intensity.
High intensity. That's the word I'm looking for. That really gives me more incentive to want to stay in that more uncomfortable zone when I'm working out.
Yeah, it's good motivation.
I'd like to hear from our listeners. If you have any thoughts on exercise improving our health as we age, please share them with us.
Yes, you can share your stories with us at our website, becomingelli.com, or on any of our social media accounts. You can find us at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, and YouTube.
And be sure to join our private Facebook group where we encourage and support each other.
It was great talking with you today, Chris. I'm looking forward to our next episode of the Fit Strong Women Over 50 podcast.
I am too. See you next time. Bye-bye now.
Bye.